Jack Lowden, welcome to An Actor Despairs. How are you doing?
Good, how you doing?
Doing great. I'm such an immense fan of your work. You're truly a tremendous actor, and it's such an honor to get the chance to speak with you. I've been watching you for a really long time, and it's so impressive the work that you've done. And I'm really just so blown away by everything that's happening for you. And it's so great to watch justice prevail. And it's a real honor to get to have you here today. So I'm really grateful for your time.
Thank you, thank you.
And The Outrun, it's such an amazing film. We're so excited to talk about that. But if it's okay with you, as my guest know, I like to start at the beginning. You grew up in Scotland, right?
That's right. Yeah, yeah, in the Scottish borders. Yeah.
How was that experience for you? Are your parents artists?
No, my parents aren't at all. But my younger brother is a ballet dancer. He's a principal ballet dancer. He was at the Royal Swedish Ballet in Stockholm for years. Now he's in France. And I'm an actor, and we don't know how that happened.
Wow. What were your parents exposing you to arts at a young age? Like, what was your artistic upbringing like?
We were just very fortunate that our parents just encouraged us to do whatever it was that we wanted to do. It became quite evident quite early on that um we wanted to go into something creative, and I sort of followed my brother into dance. Wasn't very good at it, but I'd been on stage by that point and just fell in love with being on stage, and sort of went from there. Like in my early teens, knew that I wanted to be an actor. We were just encouraged, and we were lucky enough to go to a high school in Scotland that had a particularly good art scene and some brilliant teachers. So we were just very lucky.
That's amazing. And in that art scene where there's youth theater that you were doing at a young age as you started to blossom into high school?
Yeah, I did a lot of youth theatre. I did a lot of amateur operatic societies. There's a big history of that where I come from. So there was just a lot of opportunities, which is not always the case, but a lot of sort of community-led opportunities as well. That it was, very much an amateur scene. So we just threw ourselves into that, and once we'd been in that, there was sort of no escaping what we wanted to do.
And then was it a pretty big decision to go to drama school? Did you want to stay in Scotland and go? Did you apply to the classics in London as well?
Yeah, I applied everywhere.
Wow.
I just, I knew that that was the sort of very easy, legitimate route to grasp. I also wanted to experience what it was like to sort of do higher education, so to speak, sort of almost go to university. And so yeah, I applied for all of them, and I got into the one in Glasgow, and I'm glad I did, because to have been trained up where I was from was is really satisfying now. It's something I'm enormously proud of. And yeah, did 2 years of that, and then got a job in Black Watch, National Theatre of Scotland, and was sort of off from there, basically.
Wow. And how was that experience? Black Watch was incredible. That kind of took off and you toured with that for quite some time, right?
Yeah, I did. We came over to the States. We were in Brooklyn at St. Anne's Warehouse. We
Oh,
went
wow.
to North Carolina, Austin, Washington. So I was 19 when I did that, and so that was a hell of an experience to start with. And sort of taught me everything I needed to know really about the professional life. Um, and I'm incredibly fortunate that that was it. It was one of my favorite plays. I saw it when I was about 16, 17. So to do that play around the world, and it being Scottish was it's something I'm so proud of.
Yeah, it's divine intervention. It must have been so cool for your family to see you realize that, with all the roots aligning together. Then when that finished touring, was there a question for you about whether to go back to school? Or at that point, I imagine there was a lot of other offers, perhaps auditions coming your way.
No, that was a really interesting period. Is that was it was the lead in that play. It was probably one of the most successful plays that's come out of certainly out of Scotland and out of the UK. It was hugely successful, that play, and I got a brilliant London agent. Because it was a great showcase. It was a
Yeah.
very useful thing to do down in London, and but then immediately after there was a period of about a year where I moved to London, and not a lot really happened. I got a job in a bar in North London. Um, and yeah, it was a good year or so was a period of I got auditions and things like that, but nothing seemed to take. And So that was a period of really having to stick it out, like most actors know, and I was lucky that it was only a year, obviously, but and then I got another play, and I was very play orientated at the beginning of my career, a lot of long running plays. Yeah.
Do you love working in theater? Is it seems like that's where your roots are. Is that such a something you look forward to going back to?
Yeah, it's my favorite thing. I mean, I only did a short play recently, during the summer, first play that I've done for years, and um every time I do one, I go, I don't know why I don't just do this all the time because it's what I love to do, and it is an actor's medium, and so it makes sense. I love being in film and TV, but the sort of level of control that you have on stage is about as close as you get to it. So I would spend the rest of my life on stage if I could, for sure.
And I imagine, like an athlete, that must have been such incredible training for you to live with a play and a production for so long, go up there, tour the world. I mean, that was so many drama schools, so to speak.
Yeah, I did. In the first sort of 3 or 4 years of my career, I did two 9 month long plays.
Wow.
The second one was 9 months in the one theatre, in the West End in London, which is a real test of, I wouldn't do that now. I wouldn't do
Yeah.
it now, but at 23. At 23, you're like, I'll do anything. Um, but I wouldn't do that again. That was a real test of sort of will, to do something that often. And then I did another play after that that basically had the same amount of life. Started at
Wow.
the Almeida Theatre and then went into the West End again. So I was very used to to doing something again and again and again.
And how do you keep, for the actors listening, how do you keep something like that alive and fresh? Because you're such an incredible actor, and I really hope I get a chance to see you on stage one day. But, I would really love to know how do you, with staying with something for that long, how do you keep the truth alive?
I mean, in all honesty, I get bored. I can get bored during a long running play, and it is something that I do struggle with. And I think with boredom sometimes can come laziness, and you take your eye off the ball with what you've created, and scenes can start going in a completely different way because you almost sort of, well, I do, I sort of react, my body sort of reacts in a way of sort of, I can't believe we're doing this still. And so I'll start doing things that I shouldn't really do, that make no sense for the character, but I'll almost purposely do that to knock myself off balance. I remember being in a play where I had to open a champagne bottle every night, and one night the champagne cork didn't come out, sort of way into the run.
Wow.
And instead of panicking, it was something that I loved because it was something different. And I sort of I thereafter then wished that the cork got stuck. And it's a real test of character, literally being on stage. And I think um being honest about it is something that I learned that it's okay with. I don't have to pretend that I love it every single night, because some nights I hate going to do it because I'm like, I know the outcome, and this is the same thing. And then someone being in the audience that you love, or you really are looking forward to seeing the show, changes that, or the show goes up late, or something goes wrong, a prop doesn't work, and you just find sort of coping mechanisms. But yeah, 9 months is particularly tough.
Yeah. That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. And as you had all these runs, I imagine at a certain point you kind of wanted to go back into film and TV. What did the landscape have to offer you in London? Were you coming to America at all to audition much here?
No, I really wasn't. I was very late to screen. I was, relatively speaking, I was about 23, 24. I'd been doing it since I was about 18. And it was a completely different world to me because of growing up on stage. And it was something that took a long time. I've still, I'm slowly still, I'm building it and building the experiences of it. I did I did a film called 71 with directed by Jan de Monge about the troubles in Northern Ireland, and I did a series called The Tunnel, which was a British adaptation of a Swedish-Danish thing called The Bridge. And they
Yeah.
were the first real screen roles, and then did War and Peace for the BBC. Um, and I struggled with them. I struggled with the making the transition with, because the main thing, having now I know, is that because there's no audience, and the reason I got into this was being in front of an audience, and you aren't. on a film set. You're in front of technical people and people that aren't allowed to react. So it's still something that I grapple with, and it's something I'm slowly becoming more comfortable with.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I'm curious as you transition to that medium, here in America, a lot of actors sometimes work with acting coaches. For you, having such an amazing technical roots in the theater, and was there anything that you did to kind of help navigate you into film and TV? Did you work with any coaches or?
I actually did go through a point, yeah, quite early on. I went through a point with a guy called a brilliant acting teacher called Martin Ledwith, who's a Scottish guy, one of the best around. And because I was really struggling with sort of self-consciousness in when being on screen, because suddenly when there was a camera, I would become self-conscious compared to being on stage and trying to overcome that hurdle. And it got quite overwhelming at one point where I thought, do I actually want to do this? Because if it's so feels so sort of difficult, what's really the point? And managed to sort of persevere through it, and I feel sort of on the other side of it now. But I think just repetition really does help, and experience and learning that it, trying it, trying for it to feel exactly like it did on stage, where it feels second nature. That's where you're going to set yourself up for a fall. It would feel second nature if I'd done it since I was a kid, like I'd done stage. So I've given up it trying to feel second nature, and that's made it easier.
Wow. And then having something, an experience like that, and then going into Dunkirk, something that anyone would be self-conscious in front of Nolan on that big of a thing. How was that transition into such, the kind of films that all us actors and artists dream of making? Like, what was that experience like?
I mean, that was just mad, and that was sort of smack bang in the middle of that moment. I was about 25, 26, and I was going through that of sort of questioning, how much it was that I wanted to do this. And then that came along, and like you say, something of that caliber, um, even though Dunkirk was very sort of ensemble, uh, when the camera turns on you, it's your that whole big machine goes and it's just you. It was a scary thing, and particularly on a set like that. But you're surrounded on films like that by magnificent actors like Killian and Tom Hardy and Mark Rylance, and who all come from theatre backgrounds. I mean, that's the great benefit of British and Irish actors, is that they have a great theatrical heritage. So you feel like a kindred spirit with some of these guys that are monumental film stars.
Yeah.
And so it strangely was quite a comfortable place to work because of the actors. Yeah.
And how was your experience working with Chris, with your character? I imagine, that's probably Spielberg and Nolan are the two that come to mind when we.
Yeah, it was incredible. Working with Chris was, I said it way back when we did it, but I still haven't worked with a filmmaker like him who really makes every single moment of the film. He literally makes it with his hands and is that in control. And it's that man's vision, and half of your job is trying to align with his vision and knowing your part in it, and watching somebody who is able to hold an entire film like that in their head at all points and has worked ridiculously hard in the years before it to envisage it all. It's so well worked out that it's knowing that you just need to walk in and do your job. Um, because the film truly is bigger than you and bigger than everything that everyone else does. It's just a remarkable filmmaker.
How was that experience for you as an actor and an artist, seeing the film come out and it being this huge globalized sensation? I mean, there's the films that they make once every 10 years. Was that an experience that then I imagine other people discovering you all around the world?
Yeah, it was a pretty mad time. There was a whole bunch of us that were sort of young guys that were sort of barely just getting started, and then to be thrown in at the deep end like that. It was a wonderful experience. It's never, I mean, there's sexy sides to it, and then there's sort of scary sides to it. But we were incredibly well looked after, and it's one of the things that I'm most proud of being involved in. And like you say, it is one of those films that doesn't come along that often. Um, No, it was wonderful.
How did you buoy yourself during that time? Because as you said, it can be quite mad in both a sexy and a scary way. I think it's easy for a lot of actors to kind of lose themselves to ego or to, just the overwhelming insanity of the whole production.
Yeah, there was never a chance. There was no chance that ego or anything was ever going to take over because, particularly with that film is and with his films, that you are part of something. You're just a part of it, and you know, I think I can't remember what I did. I did other things around that, and the other magnificent thing was being able to take the experience of being on a mammoth like that, then into a couple of, I think I did a couple of indie films after that. And if anything, the confidence came from having been on something that enormous with that amount of pressure and money at stake and all this kind of stuff was that ultimately, at the end of the day, they're both still similar,
Yeah.
independent, still just filmmakers and being able to follow someone's vision. It's the same thing. Doesn't matter how much money's involved in making it. So it was a real. It strangely put me on the grounded my feet even more working on that film because it's a humbling experience because of how big they are.
That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And at that point, I imagine, you had some agency, pun intended, in what you wanted to do. You mentioned you did some independent films at that point. What was interesting you? Because this is kind of getting right to before the pandemic. At this point, did Slow Horses come your way?
Sort of after that, another really cool moment was with working with Steve McQueen
Mhm.
on a thing called Mangrove, about small acts, and we did a thing called Mangrove on it. And again, getting to watch somebody, one of the greats like him, who works in a completely different way, was really wonderful. Um, I again, like even then, and still to an extent, like I'm not sort of out there looking. I wasn't looking for things and being picky. I couldn't be picky back then. I was just taking what could come, and occasionally I would be really lucky that things like a Steve McQueen film project would come. So that was a sort of no-brainer. And then work towards the pandemic, I did a film that I actually ended up co-producing as well, called Kindred, a tiny little film with me and Fiona Shaw and Tamara Lawrence.
Wow.
And that was another big moment for me in realizing that I wanted to do stuff behind the camera as well.
Talk to me about that impulse. Was that your first time producing?
Yeah, that was my first time that they wanted me in the film, and I didn't have a lot of time around that point, and sort of half of convincing me to do the part in the film, well, because I was looking for leads, but this film was sort of really cool and unique. Um, but I was, like I say, I was looking for leads, and they were very clever ultimately in saying that, well, why don't you come and sort of junior produce it and try and learn the ropes? And that's what I did, and that was a really cool experience, and it really gave me the desire to keep producing. Yeah.
Wow. And then, finally, before we dig into the Outrun, Slow Horses, how did that come your way?
Slow Horses came in around 2019, and it came in a fairly regular way. It was sort of sent, audition, tape, meet them, all this kind of stuff. It came with Gary Oldman being attached, so that obviously elevated it even more. But when I read the scripts were so unique, and very much in my wheelhouse, very cynical and sarcastic. Um, and I'd been waiting to play something like that, and slightly more comedic, and I hadn't really played that many comedic roles, but it's what I'd always wanted to do. And yeah, and then I was shooting a Terence Davies film at the time, Benediction,
Wow.
very, very completely opposite jobs. And then the pandemic hit, and we were supposed to start shooting that early 2020, and we didn't start Slow Horses till the end of 2020. Yeah.
Wow. And you're so exceptional in that show as River Cartwright. Your work is, I love what you're doing with the balancing the comedy, and it's just excellent. But I'm really excited to talk to you about the Outrun. And so I heard you originally had heard about the book and were reading that.
Yeah, it was just a coincidence. I bought the book. I went to the Orkney Islands about 3, 4 years before I read the book. I bought the book whilst I was there, and it sat on my bookshelf unread. And then when lockdown happened, because I roughly knew that it was set outdoors, and we were all craving that during lockdown, I read it, and didn't really know what it was about. And then when I read it, and evidently it was about a young woman's struggle with addiction and the story of it, but the way that it's written so unpretentiously and rawly and honestly, I was with Saoirse at the time and just said, "You've got to read this book, because you've got to think about playing this part." And she
Yeah.
read it, and the rest is sort of history.
Wow, that's incredible. And what was that experience like after, both having the shared experience of reading it? Obviously you'd already co-produced one film. For this, I imagine was your first like full dive in. Did you have the idea of getting the rights already aligned? Did you have directors? Like what was your process like for getting this together?
Yeah, so the first port of call was, are the rights available? And we looked into that, and someone already had the rights. Another producer called Sarah Brocklehurst, who'd had them for quite a few years and had been on her journey with the project. Because it's not the easiest book to adapt. It
Yeah.
doesn't scream that it should be made into a film, instantly, but there was something in it that we, Sash and I, knew should be a film. So it was just a case of contacting Sarah, approaching her, and offering to be involved, and then we worked it out from there as a co-pro. And from there, then we found Nora, the director, and managed to convince her to do it, and the whole thing just keeps building from there. So we were really lucky that Sarah, who had the rights, agreed for us to come on board, and it was just a huge learning curve of how to work with others, and how to bridge the gaps that can be between different departments, and how to be of use as obviously both two creatives, how we could be of use to the best way possible, and also learning how to get out of the way when we'd veer into territory that we didn't really know what to do with as much as other people. And that was the great joy of it, was learning.
Wow. Yeah. And my audience knows this, but I'm an addict in recovery, and I actually hit my bottom in London. And this film is exceptional, and it deals with addiction in a real way that I don't often see depicted in films, maybe other than The Lost Weekend and some other ones that really get it so accurately. And, given that that's such a core component of the book, what was the process like for, obviously it's biographical, but then I believe you changed the character's name for the film. How was the experience of sort of coming together with this? Real life writer and then building this character, but also making it its own thing, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. I mean, that was the conversations had to be very open and frank, uh, instantly, and who was comfortable with what. And a decision was made very early on between Nora and Amy, whose memoir it is, and Saoirse, to create a little bit of distance between uh real life Amy and the character of Rona. So they changed the name. I thought it was a very clever way of just distancing it ever so slightly, so it was easier for those three. And Saoirse and Amy were very upfront with one another about when Saoirse didn't want Amy on set, and because it would make her self-conscious, particularly if it was a particularly raw moment. And Amy was, incredibly receptive to that, and they were both hugely respectful of one another, and where it can be beneficial and where it can actually damage the process. And Nora was the great sort of mediator of that. And Nora and Amy writing the script made a huge difference, having Amy involved in that process. Both of them co-wrote it. And I guess that was another great decision, because the story is so personal, and it could quickly become, like some addiction stories can quickly become, arbitrary and vague and cliched. And we wanted Amy to be involved so that there was that level of authenticity in the tiny little things that would have made it specific to her. Um, and we were just incredibly lucky that that worked out, because that doesn't always work out when the real person is involved in something. Amy was just magnificent at being involved in the right moments and stepping back in the other. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, it's so beautiful. And the islands are where she actually wrote it as well, right?
Yeah, so the islands play an enormous part in it, where she took herself off after hitting rock bottom in London. She took herself back to where she was from, where she was brought up, and sort of a self-exile, so to speak, on this tiny island of Papi, sort of 1 mile by 3 mile, um, to, yes, in a way, and wean herself off of alcohol, but to re-find herself and try and refocus her really overactive mind on things that weren't going to damage her and weren't going to hurt her further, which was nature, and this huge, long, lifelong, it's still ongoing story of self-help and recovery through what is immediately around her. And the sheer will and determination of somebody to do that. And Saoirse and I have only through this process gained even more respect for people like yourself that managed to do it. And I think that is the great thing about this film, is that it ultimately gives you a message of hope, but it doesn't do it in a sort of cheesy way, because it does show the cyclical nature of addiction, and that it will never fully leave one's life. It will always be there to a certain extent, but that you can control it. Yeah.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, one of the things I thought was so excellent and source was so incredible in the film is the component of sometimes as addicts get sober, we have a tendency for everything out here, job, life, social things to get better and things in here sometimes to get worse in our mind if we don't do the work. And I thought this film absolutely nailed that aspect of it. And, balancing the three timelines and the cinematography and the score. Talk to me about the production of this film and, obviously all the different locations. How was that experience of like, how do you plan for that? Because you shot on this incredibly small island. I got to imagine there's got to be so much pre-production that goes into play for this.
Yeah, there was a lot of pre-production, there was a lot of planning. We sort of worked ourselves up the UK. We started in London with a full-size crew, then we went to Edinburgh, and then we got to the Orkney Islands. We cut the crew down. Then by the time we got to Pappy, it was a sort of skeleton crew, because the Isle of Pappy has a population of about 50, 60 people, and we were basically going to add a third to that by even a skeleton crew turning up. So we had to be really mindful of that. We also had to be mindful of the seasons, particularly when it came to things like lambing. The season of lambing, sheep giving birth, happens at a slightly later time the further north you go. And so we had a whole pre-production, an entire week on the Orkney Islands with a very small crew trying to capture Serge being able to deliver a real lamb, which she did multiple times,
Wow.
waiting on call with a shepherd um, on a farm in Orkney, ringing us up and going, right, it's giving birth, run, 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 run. And so we search the director, the cinematographer, they turn up and they managed to catch it. And so it was the same with the birds. It was the same with we when we finished, Nora, rightly so, argued heavily for needing to show more of the seasonal changes on the island of Pappy. So we managed to find money and find more time for a cameraman to go back to the island during winter when there was snow. Um, it was a long shoot for an independent. It was 10 weeks
Oh,
in
wow.
total, long, and it needed to be. And that was the hardest thing about it, that we needed to have time for things to happen. So it was a tough one. It was tough.
That's incredible. And obviously this is the kind of film us artists love and that's really having a hard time in the business getting made. So it gives me so much hope that, this film is going to be received so well. I know that, but I'm curious, you know, once the film was done, then was there the idea of maybe going to festivals or did you already have Sony lined up at this point?
No, I mean the film was, you know, a great thing to know is that, like, even if you have someone like Serge in the lead role, who, four-time Oscar nominee, hugely, a very bankable, green lightable actor, so to speak, is that we struggled to take it to a single place,
Wow.
but it was more to do with the fact that the nature of the film, trying to convince people that this could be a film, because like I say, the memoir, we would have nights, sleepless nights, we'd go, should we actually be trying to make this, and if should it just stay a book? Trying to convince people that it could become a film, whilst also protecting what Nora really wanted, was that it had space for improv. She had a scriptment, what was called a scriptment, not necessarily a script. People in our industry, they want scripts, they want it all done, because there's a lot of people with not a lot of imagination. Remember that you have to convince to have imagination, and you need to put it in front of them. So we had to make our case a lot for trust us, trust the process of it. So we financed it we had wonderful public funders. We had Screen Scotland, who were particularly phenomenal. BBC Films. Because Nora being German, as she brought a lot of German crew with her, so that she would feel at home, so to speak. It became a UK German co-pro, so we could access money in Germany. So it was a sort of patchwork finance. And then when we had the film, like everybody does, we submitted it to film festivals and it got in to quite a few of them, which we were just so beside ourselves with.
Amazing.
When I went to Sundance, which was a real sort of marquee moment for the film. And yes, then Studio Canal came on board for the UK and other parts of Europe, and then ultimately Sony Classics for North America, which was a real coup, and they've been fantastic, Sony, in believing in the project, and we can't wait to see what they do with it as they work towards the release on the 4th.
Yeah, I'm so excited, and I know the world's going to respond to this film. It's the kind of film that we need, and I have so much gratitude for what you've done with it. I'm curious now, after having this one finished, are both as an actor and a producer, what's inspiring you creatively at the moment?
In all honesty, having made this is
Wow.
inspiring, and I want we both want to make more, and Serge and I are taking our time and being very particular about what we do because we realize that we did start looking at building something with a slate and things like that, and it quickly became not evident that that's what we wanted to do because you're building a slate for the hell of it. Um, we've realized that we made this film because we just fell in love with the story and wanted to do that. So if we can keep that up, that we just do things that we badly want to do rather than feeling that we're obliged to make things, as long as we can keep that up, we'll want to do it. So we're just taking our time. But it's made me as an actor, it's made me realize that I love acting, but ultimately I want to be more involved than that, and I want to be of more use. And so it's finding the right people to do that with is another big journey.
Yeah,
Um, but I certainly know, and Serge and we both know that with each other is how we want to do that. Yeah.
that's beautiful, and I love to hear that. Is directing something that you feel a draw to?
Yeah, directing is something that I ultimately want to do. And it's it's sort of it's convincing myself to do it and take the leap. I know that I'm not a writer, which doesn't help with that. Um,
Me
I
either.
know
It's
that,
okay.
but I know, and write because writing is a great way of doing that, right? I mean, it's a great way of developing that muscle. And particularly when you can keep as much of the control as possible. And so that's sort of getting in the way of me doing it at the moment. I need to work out how best to do that. I don't just want to, turn up and just direct something that someone else has written. I want to
Right.
work how I can help shape it. But yeah, ultimately that is what I'd love to do. Yeah.
That's amazing. And having that personal relationship, I totally understand. And I'm curious, obviously all creatives, for everyone listening, have to carry the boulder up the hill. And it's no secret right now the business is in a slump. And for the artists listening right now, any words of wisdom you might have to share to keep the faith and keep fighting the fight, even as troubling as it may seem at times?
There's
And
the
that's a
there's
tough question. I know that. I'm sorry.
it's
Yeah.
not. I mean, there's the brute point that ultimately the world, everybody needs this, everybody needs what we do. I think it sounds a sort of trite point to make, but with something like the pandemic, you truly saw that everybody fell back on the arts. Everybody was just at home, and it was all about what you were watching or what you were reading.
Yeah.
And it really it was a truly remarkable moment for championing of the arts, and and showing us that it's something that is constantly regarded as sort of secondary, the arts. It's not as important as other public services and da 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 da. And obviously there's an argument to be made for that at some point. But ultimately it's what people reach for. People reach for it to relax, to think, to not think, and that what you are doing, even though it can feel like you're pushing it uphill, is that it is a completely noble task. you can quite quickly in this industry, it can feel very vacuous and self-serving, but you will always ultimately help someone by doing it. So even if it feels like you are pushing a massive boulder up a hill, like you will help someone the further you get it up there, not just yourself. And it's quite a hard thing to ignore yourself when you're creating a bit of art because it's so hard to survive as one. But knowing that if you do it, you're not just going to help yourself, you are going to help others. And I truly believe that. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And earlier, just to expound upon that, you mentioned, after you got done with the plays, there was like a year gap period where things weren't really going audition wise. What did you do to keep yourself in that forward momentum during that time?
I mean that was a different because I was about 21 years old, so um I was very young and it was very much about I had I had enough self-belief then that eventually it will happen. Someone else will employ me to act again. I imagine that's a lot harder. I have friends I went to drama school with that when they went to drama school, they were in their 30s, and people that I'm still friends with now who are in their mid 40s, and they're still sort of struggling with becoming an actor or not. And some of them have made the decision, which I think is just as brave and also just as smart, that they go, this is clearly not happening for me. And this sounds almost a stupid point to say on an arts podcast, but they've said to themselves, this is clearly not happening for me. So I want to make my own decision to do something else. It's never going to take my love away from it, but protecting themselves in that way and constantly putting them through rejection and whatever, it's a totally individual thing how much you want to bear that. And I have just as much admiration for people that call it a day and go, I'm going to do something else. And they use those skills because most people, particularly our actors, have quite a lot of them have wonderful characteristics. They're quite affable and they can be hugely beneficial in other aspects of life or other aspects in the industry. And so I have friends that have moved into different aspects of the industry and are wonderfully successful and having the time of their lives. But it's because they had the courage to call it a day. So there's courage in persevering. There is that, but there is courage in calling it a day as well, because it can be a horrible thing to
Yeah.
pursue when no one's giving you it. And I have more admiration for people that pivot and use it in a different way. It's
Thank
a
you for
strange advice, but yeah.
No, thank you for saying that. It's really important to hear that, and I really am grateful for that advice. And I just want to say you're such an incredible artist, and everything you've done in your career, it's just so remarkable. And I have so much gratitude for you coming on, giving back, and sharing everything you've had to say today. It means a lot to me.
Thank you, man. No, that means a lot, man. Thank you so much.
And everything that you and Sorsa and Nora and Amy have done with this film, it's impeccable. And I'm so excited for the world to see it. And I'm wishing you nothing but the best. And I hope we get to cross paths on a project one day soon.
Yeah, thank you so much, man. I hope so. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, Jack Loudon. So much love. Thanks for coming on.
No problem. Thank you.